I shared the following sermon on Shabbat, and afterwards some congregants approached me and said I should really share this farther and wider beyond the Shabbat regulars and guests, specifically with the families and the children and grandchildren, for they should understand these points too. I begin with a story from an ancient midrash. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught, imagine there are people sitting on a boat, and one of them takes a drill and begins drilling a hole in the bottom. His fellow passengers say, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Why do you care? I'm just drilling under myself. It's my seat." And they say, "Because the water will rise and flood the whole boat. We're all on this boat." And this legend is a vivid picture of how we are all connected, how we're all on the same boat. And we know that other people's actions, like our own families, for example, affect us deeply. And what we do by ourselves affects other people too. And even today, our own actions enable others to sink or to thrive. I was thinking about the story in the context of the larger conversation about Israel today. When different people tell lies about Israel and its war against Hamas, and I notice this with increasing frequency in different media, I feel like our collective boat is being punctured with holes and taking on water. I feel that we sink a little bit more with every lie that is told. And I'm not talking about criticism of Israel, for fair criticism is fair game, but outright lies. And when other people courageously speak out truthfully about Israel and Hamas, I feel they are plugging those holes, dumping out the water, and righting our boat. There is one lie in particular that just angers me every time I hear it, more so than any other, that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. This charge feels like taking a jackhammer to that boat, not just a little drill. And I wince every time I hear this because it is 100% false in two ways. And I wish to speak more about this today because we are seeing this and hearing this and reading this more and more, and because it's on the docket of the International Court of Justice. This canard of Israel and genocide is gaining traction, and we have a responsibility to shine the light of truth on what's really happening. There are some people out there who strongly oppose Israel for different reasons, and I doubt they can be convinced otherwise. Instead, I turn my focus to the many others who are often not well educated about Israel's complex history and today's geopolitical issues. And I feel that the word genocide is being used in discussing Israel, and the more it is, the more these undecided people's opinions of Israel will be swayed to the other side. And I know there are many young people, Jewish and even pro-Israel, who aren't sure how to respond when they are confronted with the accusation that Israel is committing genocide. They don't have the language to speak up, even if they want to. Jewish kids should have a response for others, but more importantly, they should know in their hearts how blatantly false that is and why. And so these words today are for them and for those who interact with those young people, who is really all of us. First, it's vital to acknowledge how devastating this war has been to this point. For Israelis, October 7th was the worst single-day massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. As we have heard, 1,200 people were savagely murdered in their own homes in Israel proper, and many others were brutally maimed and traumatized in so many ways. 250 hostages were taken captive, and about 125 remain locked up in Gaza today. Some are alive, we hope. Others are not. We know. About 300 Israeli soldiers have been killed in action since the war began, and about 250,000 Israelis have been living away from their homes in the north and the south because it's not safe for them to return there to their homes because of the rocket fire. And the psychological trauma for the whole nation is incalculable and endless. And for the Palestinians too, the war in Gaza has been a nightmare. The Gaza Health Ministry estimates over 36,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war. I want to put an asterisk on that number. The health ministry is run by Hamas, which has an incentive to inflate the numbers because that increases pressure against Israel. Israel's army, the IDF, estimates about 15,000 Hamas terrorists have been killed, which leaves about 21,000 non-Hamas Palestinians. This number does not include the civilians killed by Hamas rockets. And interestingly, the official UN count of Palestinian women and children killed during the war decreased by almost 47% earlier this month. At any rate, it is impossible to know how many civilians support Hamas and how many do not. But clearly there's been a devastating loss among innocent Palestinians. Not only loss of life, but loss of homes and livelihood. We can believe, and I do, that the ultimate responsibility for all this destruction lies at the feet of Hamas, not Israel. But we should acknowledge the tremendous suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians, including many children. Everyone with a heart should at least acknowledge that. Let me now turn to what is not happening, and then to what is happening. What is not happening is genocide. According to the United Nations, genocide is defined as a crime committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group in whole or in part. Let me emphasize the word intent. War is categorically destructive, but it's the warring party's intention that determines if genocide has been committed. The Nazi Party openly sought to destroy the Jewish people, which is why the Holocaust is a clear example of genocide. The reason Israel is not committing genocide is not because the Holocaust happened to us years ago, but because Israel today clearly intends to spare innocent lives as seen by their actions. And we are very familiar with the examples. Israel routinely sends text messages, makes direct phone calls, and drops leaflets for residents to leave a building that is housing weapons or Hamas fighters before they have to knock it down. This way, innocent Palestinians can evacuate ahead of time, as they have. Israel gives ample time for civilians to evacuate a neighborhood or city before it sends in its soldiers to fight there. Daily pauses have been routine. Israel does this knowing that Hamas fighters walk out safely alongside those innocent civilians. Israel regularly calls off missions when they learn that innocent passersby are in the immediate area. And very sadly, this does not always happen, and tragic mistakes are made sometimes. But these are accidental, not intentional, which is key. John Spencer is the American go-to expert on urban warfare at West Point, and he published an essay in Newsweek 2 months ago. He wrote, "In my long career studying and advising on urban warfare for the U.S. military, I've never known an army to take such measures to attend to the enemy's civilian population, especially while simultaneously combating the enemy in the very same buildings. In fact, by my analysis, Israel has implemented more precautions to prevent civilian harm than any military in history, above and beyond what international law requires, and more than the U.S. did in its wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The IDF has telegraphed almost every move ahead of time, so civilians can relocate, nearly always ceding the element of surprise. This has allowed Hamas to reposition its senior leaders and the Israeli hostages as needed. My count of civilians who have died in Gaza is a ratio of roughly 1 combatant to 1.5 civilians. Given Hamas's likely inflation of the death count, the real figure could be closer to 1-to-1. Either way, the number would be historically low for modern urban warfare. So if genocide is not occurring, What is? A war. A war that's entering almost its 9th month. And it's a just war that's taking even longer because of all the precautions. And it's an ethical war because Israel did not start this war, did not want this war, but Israel must eliminate the terrorist threat who lives on its borders, just like any other nation would. And Israel must bring the innocent hostages home, just like any other nation should. If these two pieces are not justification for going to war, then what is? The civilian casualty number is so high because Hamas will not end this war, neither by laying down their arms nor releasing the hostages. Israel has repeatedly offered a temporary ceasefire in exchange for the hostages, and it is Hamas that is saying no, no, no. This war is unprecedented in so many ways, but it all comes back to this. Israel does everything it can to minimize Palestinian casualties, while Hamas does all it can to maximize Palestinian casualties. As we know, Hamas embeds its fighters into civilian populations and uses them as human shields. Its fighters wear civilian clothes, not uniforms. They hide their weapons in hospitals, mosques, schools, UN facilities, and cemeteries. They stole billions of dollars from their own citizens to build an underground web of tunnels, when they should have used that building material to rebuild homes, schools, and hospitals. Hamas prevents ordinary citizens from taking shelter in these same tunnels, which would save their lives, maintaining them only for fighters and hostages. They steal food and fuel from the humanitarian convoys meant for their own people. And these are the people Hamas is supposed to govern. All this and more makes this an unprecedented enemy in battlefield. It pains me to acknowledge that Israel has made many mistakes in the course of this fighting, some small, others large. When Israeli drones targeted the World Central Kitchen aid convoy in April, that was a tragic mistake. And when Israel targeted 2 Hamas leaders last week but ignited a fire that killed 45 people, that was a tragic accident. And Israel's prime minister acknowledged as much in public. In the fog of war, in the heat of battle, accidents happen, mistakes are made. Israel must do its utmost best to minimize these. But it's important to acknowledge that these are mistakes and accidents, not intentional events. It's okay to be upset when Israel makes a mistake. I am. It's okay to not agree with every statement every Israeli leader makes. I don't. It's okay to question Israel's tactical decisions like entering Rafah. I do. It's okay to wish that more humanitarian aid reached civilians and that people there were eating more and not starving. I do. And it's okay to call for a plan for the day after in Gaza. I wish we had one to see. We don't have to agree with everything Israel's government does or says to still stand by Israel's side in this fight, which we should, because if Israel loses, Hamas wins and remains in power. Earlier I mentioned that the genocide claim against Israel is 100% false in 2 ways. The first is that Israel intends to spare innocent civilian lives, not kill them, as I explained. And the second is that not enough people affirm there actually is a genocidal party in this war, Hamas. The Hamas charter openly calls for genocide against Jews and the total destruction of Israel. Google it. Read it for yourself. October 7th was the day they were frighteningly successful in their butchery, if only partially. And since then, they have continued to launch rockets indiscriminately at Israel and to retain the hostages. They have openly called for recreating October 7th in the future as well. And if that's not genocide in practice, that's only because the IDF stands in their way. But the intent is there, and the intent is what matters when it comes to genocide. To accuse Israel of genocide and not apply the label to Hamas is doubly outrageous. It's uncomfortable for me, for us, to even say the word genocide, and even to talk about Israel in this war, mistakes and all. But if we don't tell our young people how we see what's happening, our children, our grandchildren, they will encounter that word in other places without us being present to guide, to explain, to answer questions. And so, as uncomfortable as it is, each of us has work to do to repair the holes that have punctured our collective boat. As I close, I wish to turn back to words I shared in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. I heard a teaching from Alan Dershowitz who quoted the last verse in Psalm 29, which we sing in full every Friday night as part of Kabbalat Shabbat services. It reads, Adonai Oz, Le'amo Yiten, Adonai Yevarech et Amo V'Shalom. God will give strength to his people. God will bless his people with peace. There is indeed a deep connection between God's blessings of strength and peace. Sometimes peace only comes as a result of strength. But the purpose of strength and power must always be peace. May God grant strength to the people of Israel and to the army of Israel to defeat Hamas and to bring home the hostages. And may that victory soon bring peace to all who live in the region. Adonai Oz Le'amo Yiten, Adonai Yevarech et Amo V'Shalom.